Outside of a few guys here and there, free agency is basically wrapped up. A majority of the bigger names anyway. So this is the best time for me to finally put out Mock Draft 1.0. Because the NFL draft is going to be here before we know it, and a lot of things have fallen into place with free agency now. And what does the draft look like? Whether a team's going to go best player available, whether they're going to draft for a position of need, or they're just going to screw it up altogether like a lot of NFL teams somehow figure out to do. And I love doing mock drafts because it gives me an opportunity to play around with some different scenarios that allow NFL teams to get better through the draft. And my mock draft is going to look a lot different than everybody else's mock draft. It is really hard to try and figure out exactly where everybody is going to go. This is actually a great time for a mock draft because filling out a mock draft is a lot like a March Madness bracket. You really don't know what's going to happen. And last year for the 2024 NFL draft, I had all but 4 of the first round selections correct. I didn't have them all going to the right teams, but I had all but 4 guys being drafted within the first round. And 2 of those guys that weren't drafted in the first round, I still had first round grades on. So even though my mock draft may not look exactly like how you want it to or how you feel it should, this is something I feel like I've gotten pretty good at. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at mock draft 1.0 with the number 1 overall pick being my QB1, Cam Ward, to the Tennessee Titans. Now, obviously, there's still a lot of potential for a move to be made here, and a lot of it is going to be based on Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers has taken his sweet time. Russell Wilson's kind of waiting on Aaron Rodgers. But if neither of those guys select the New York Giants, I wouldn't be shocked if the Giants don't try to move up here to number 1 overall. Tennessee drops back to 3, they gain a bunch of picks to go with it, and then they can really redo everything. So I don't have any trades in this mock draft because a lot of that is going to hinge on what those 2 quarterbacks end up doing. So at number 1 overall, Tennessee goes with their quarterback of the future, Cam Ward. And I have Cam Ward significantly above Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders is closer to Jackson Dart than what he is to Cam Ward at this point for me in my evaluation. He'll end up being a good quarterback, but Cam Ward is the type of quarterback that can do to Tennessee what Jaden Daniels did to the Washington Commanders last season. Is Ward as good as Daniels? Absolutely not. I'm not trying to say that, but he is the type of quarterback that can make that impact on a roster. Number 2 to the Cleveland Browns, I'm going with Travis Hunter, and this is one scenario that I don't see talked about all that much. It's either a quarterback or Abdul Carter. But they signed Myles Garrett, so now you have your edge taken care of and you don't absolutely have to replace him. And as far as a quarterback goes, it really feels like Cleveland is trying to find discounts because they're paying Deshaun Watson a lot of money, so when he comes back from his injury, he's going to get another chance. So why don't you try to fill a couple of different voids? And that's where Travis Hunter comes into play because he could step in and he could help out at cornerback right away. He could step in and he could help at wide receiver right away too. Travis Hunter could definitely help Cleveland on both sides of the ball. And if there's anything that Cleveland needs right now, it's help on both sides of the ball. Travis Hunter would be a really good fit. At number 3, this is where I'll have Shedeur Sanders going. And even though I'm not nearly as high on him as some people, I still don't see how the guy is not drafted within the first 5 rounds. And we know the New York Giants need help. And maybe they end up signing Aaron Rodgers. Maybe they sign Russell Wilson. Maybe they do that and they still draft Sanders anyway. But Shedeur Sanders at number 3 to the New York Giants is going to help them level up their game. And that's why he's my Turtle Beach level up your game pick of this mock draft, because Shedeur Sanders, basically any quarterback, could help Malik Neighbors and that offense go to the next level. And I've been using Turtle Beach to level up my game for quite some time, especially when I'm on the computer playing Call of Duty, Fortnite, or something else. Whether it be their awesome headsets, their mice, or their keyboards, Turtle Beach has everything you need as a gamer to take your experience to the next level. And if you head on over to Turtle Beach right now, you can use code word headliners for 10% off your entire order. I really feel like the Cleveland Browns would love to have a code word to get 10% off of Deshaun Watson's contract. But that's not going to end up happening, and that's why they're going to skip on a quarterback, and Sanders is going to fall here to the New York Giants. And Shedeur Sanders, to me, is not an all-pro caliber quarterback. Maybe at some points he will be, but to me, he feels like a safer quarterback. He feels like a guy that's going to do enough. Maybe he's not going to make all of the big plays, and maybe he's going to be limited in some capacity, but he's going to get the job done. And based on this year's draft class at the quarterback position, that still warrants a top 5 pick. And listen, all the New York Giants need at the quarterback position is competency. So Shedeur Sanders, even though I'm not in love with him, would still greatly help that offense. Malik Neighbors and Brian Dabble need something to happen or he's going to be out of a job. At number 4 to New England, I'm going to go with Abdul Carter. He is my number 1 overall player in this draft, but I know that there's some uncertainty around the foot and whether or not he's going to need surgery. As of right now, it doesn't sound like he will, and obviously he's going to have his agent hyping him up, and his agent is saying that there's going to be no issues, but I wouldn't be shocked if he does fall a little bit because of it. And isn't this the type of player that Mike Vrabel would absolutely love to bring in during his first year at the helm of the New England Patriots? Absolutely it is. So Abdul Carter, if he were to fall, would be an absolute gift to the New England Patriots. At number 5 to Jacksonville, I'm going to go with Mason Graham, interior defensive lineman out of Michigan. For the past month, this pick to me has been pretty easy. Will Johnson, cornerback, also out of Michigan. But Will Johnson is still banged up right now, and it doesn't sound like he's going to be doing much at his pro day. And because of that, he's going to start falling on draft boards. So I really don't consider him to be a top 5 pick anymore, even if the talent is there for it. Mason Graham, however, is an easy top 5 pick. He's one of the most gifted defensive players in this entire draft. He can play the run. He can get after the quarterback. He can do anything that you need a guy in the middle of your defense to do. Is he going to be as good as Aaron Donald or a Hall of Famer like Aaron Donald? Maybe not. But if you're looking for the diet version of Aaron Donald, Mason Graham fits it all. It is in the absolute consensus right now that Ashton Jeanty will go to the Las Vegas Raiders at number 6. And I couldn't agree any more with it. Let's go ahead and take a look at his draft profile, which if you pre-order our draft guide, it's going to be coming out and available very soon. And you're going to find these type of scouting reports for all of the major fantasy viable players. But on top of it, you're also going to get an influx of defensive scouting reports and guys that maybe are not being talked about nearly enough. So if you're interested in getting a look at all of these scouting reports, definitely think about getting our 2025 fantasy football draft guide, which will open up prior to the NFL draft with all of my NFL draft research, dynasty information, and then as we get closer to the regular season, you're going to see all of that redraft content come in on a consistent basis. But Ashton Jeanty is like the perfect combination of athleticism and power. He's got great receiving skills. I mean, he is a guy that will make you miss. He will run you over. He will shed your tackle. He is the true workhorse type of running back that NFL teams will cover. Now, there are some different things in terms of pass protection he's got to get better of, and then breakaway speed and acceleration. While good, it's not elite. So you're definitely going to see some of those bigger plays at the NFL level maybe come down a little bit that he saw at the college level. Love him though. He's a day one starter. He's going to be a guy that could come in and help the Raiders right away. And the Raiders are reworking their offense. They brought in Geno Smith, and they're going to be moving to the type of offense that we saw Pete Carroll run when he was in Seattle. What did they do then? Russell Wilson and Marshawn Lynch ran things together. Ashton Jeanty could be the Marshawn Lynch for the Las Vegas Raiders, even though Marshawn Lynch was also with the Las Vegas Raiders for a short period. At number 7, I've got the New York Jets going with Will Campbell, offensive tackle out of LSU. There are some concerns about his arm length, but he's still my top offensive tackle in this draft because of his footwork and other areas in which he dominates the game. Now, the New York Jets, for me, we're going to be taking a defensive player here for the longest time. But after free agency and Morgan Moses being gone, Will Campbell could easily play offensive tackle, or if they make another move, he could easily move move into guard as well. And that could give Justin Fields a little bit more protection. So hopefully that offense doesn't look nearly as poor as it has over the last few years. And for number 8, Carolina, I've got him going with McMillan, wide receiver out of Arizona. Also considered to be the number 1 wide receiver in this class, right behind Travis Hunter, if you consider him only a wide receiver. McMillan is the type of wide receiver that is not only going to play well on the outside, running those deep routes that you need and fighting for the ball down the field, but he also is such a good route runner that he's going to dominate over the middle of the field as well. And Carolina revamped their defense. So even though I thought a defensive player here would be their best bet, now that they spent a ton of money on the defensive side of the ball, let's get Bryce Young, a true game-changing weapon at the wide receiver position. So hopefully he can continue to grow off of what we saw at the end of 2024. The New Orleans Saints at number 9 are one of those teams that I feel like could go several different directions. So if you're a Saints fan and you don't agree with this pick, I don't blame you, because there's a few different ways that you could go. Now, when you take a look at the most needed areas for the Saints, at one point, I thought it was the edge, but they re-signed Chase Young and he's going to stick around a little bit longer. So to me now, cornerback feels like a little bit more of a need. You could argue that you all need another wide receiver instead. But Will Johnson, I already mentioned him. Unfortunately, he's going to be falling down draft boards. Just a month ago, he was a top 5 pick. And if New Orleans wants to battle within their division, with Baker Mayfield in that offense, with Bryce Young, if he continues to get better, if they're going to want to do battle, then they're going to need some really solid cornerbacks. Will Johnson is that guy, and he can be that guy as long as he ends up being healthy. Originally, offensive line was the call here for the Chicago Bears at number 10. Ashton Jeanty falling to number 10 was kind of that number 2 option for me. But I don't think Jeanty's going to make it past the Raiders unless Chicago decides to move up. And Chicago completely redid their offensive line, so it's looking a whole lot better. Could they still go with the tackle here? Yeah, absolutely. But on the defensive side of the ball, I feel like Stewart would be a great fit for the Bears. And while Ben Johnson may want a shiny new toy on the offensive side of the ball or someone to at least help him there, getting after the quarterbacks in this division are going to be a must. Jared Goff in that offensive line, Jordan Love, J.J. McCarthy, and the completely redone offensive line for the Minnesota Vikings as well. There's going to be needs at the edge position for the Chicago Bears, and I don't hate this one. At number 11, San Francisco could go a couple of different ways as well. But protecting Brock Purdy, you're probably going to be investing a lot of money into here very soon. As of this recording, he doesn't have a massive extension, but that could be coming at any time. And if you're going to protect him, you got to do it on offense. And one of the fastest rising offensive players on the line in this draft is this guy right here, Membou, offensive guard out of Missouri. This is a guy that can play inside at guard. He can play outside at tackle. Think about guys like Zach Martin, Quentin Nelson. That's who this guy is. And you know what? Put him at guard right now, and if you decide in the next year or two you need him at tackle, you could do that as well. Not only are you protecting Brock Purdy, but you're also going to protect your run game as well, which will sorely be needed. At number 12 for the Dallas Cowboys, I could see them going a couple of different directions as well. Heck, I saw Mel Kiper mock Omarion Hampton, the running back out of North Carolina, who you're going to hear more about here in a few minutes, going to the Dallas Cowboys. And I tell you what, as a huge Hampton truther, I would love that fit, and I would be looking for him everywhere in fantasy football. But I feel like the Dallas Cowboys know that they can get a little bit of a better value at the running back position later, and they're going to go with somebody that you're not going to be able to get later, a fast, physical outside receiver like Matthew Golden, to give Dak Prescott another weapon, to help take the pressure off of CeeDee Lamb, and to hopefully get this offense back to functioning at full capacity, because Schottenheimer is going to need his offense to be at full capacity this season. And when you take a look at the scouting report for Matthew Golden, his strengths are going to be his speed, his yards after the catch, and his route running and breaks. He's fast. He's aggressive at the point of contact. He does a lot of good things after he has the ball in his hands. If you watched my video breakdown on Marvin Harrison Jr. the other day, Matthew Golden is the opposite. When he gets the ball in his hands, he gets aggressive and he looks for as many yards as he can find. Now, you would like for him to have a little bit more length than what he currently has, and at times on film, you see some drops that are caused by body catching. Instead of attacking the ball with his hands, sometimes he lets it get a little too deep. Now, he may have run himself into kind of that wide receiver one conversation at the combine with his 40. He's got the speed and the ability to create yards after the catch, and it makes him a big play threat from everywhere on the field, which is exactly what Dallas needs. At number 13, the Miami Dolphins. They need help on the offensive line. Absolutely could go offensive line here. But you know what might be even worse shape? Their defensive line. As of this recording, the Miami Dolphins only have 2 defensive linemen under contract. I'm a big James Pierce fan out of Tennessee. I think he could be elite at the NFL level. And I think the only reason that he's not being talked about closer to Abdul Carter or Shamar Stewart is because he's got some off-field question marks that hopefully will end up getting taken care of and you won't have to worry about him anymore. But right now, it feels like these guys need help on the defensive line more than anywhere. At number 14 to Indianapolis, this also feels like a huge consensus right now that I don't know if I buy fully into, but it does make sense. And that's why I'm going with tight end Tyler Warren out of Penn State to the Indianapolis Colts. I do feel like they could go a couple of different areas here, and that Tyler Warren is not as locked in as a lot of people feel. But I do know Tyler Warren can help in a couple of different facets of the game. Number one, blocking. Help protect Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones if he wins the job. He is a really good blocker, and he can play that naturally as a tight end. Number two, another weapon, a guy that can definitely give another target that the defense has to worry about. But I also could see the Indianapolis Colts going with a cornerback here or a safety as well. So keep those 2 positions in mind when the Colts come on the clock. At number 15, the Atlanta Falcons, who over the course of the last 4 years have finished bottom 10 in the NFL in pass rush win rate. They have got to get better at the edge, and they have got to get after the quarterback better. And that's why going edge, Jalen Walker out of Georgia here would make a ton of sense for this defense because, yep, you worked on your offense last season. This year, you skipped on the edge and you went with Michael Penix. You've got to get the edge now. At number 16, the Arizona Cardinals, another team with a ton of options. They've got depth all over the place, so really they can go best player available here, or they could end up trading back and get themselves a few extra picks and still get some really good players. Look for Arizona to be one of those teams that could potentially move back. But I'm going to go with Jahdae Barron, cornerback out of Texas, to be the pick here, because last season they allowed one of the worst completion rates for defenses in all the NFL. And out in the West, you've got Stafford, you've got Purdy that you have to deal with, and now you're also going to have Sam Darnold with the Seattle Seahawks. Stopping the pass is going to be very important. At number 17, the Cincinnati Bengals, and they just spent $25 billion, it feels like, on their offense. They need to do something on the defensive side of the ball because you let Trey Hendrickson go seek a trade because you're not going to be able to pay him because you wanted to pay Higgins and you wanted to pay Jamar Chase. And Sam Hubbard on the other side definitely hit you with a little bit of an unexpected retirement. So because of that, now you need to replace that pressure that was being caused over there because if you don't, your defense is going to be a mess this year. And last year's FBS sack leader, Mike Green, would be exactly who you need on the edge. And number 18, the Seattle Seahawks, who have been completely revamping their offense, haven't really revamped the offensive line, where the biggest problem is. So the big man out of Texas, offensive tackle, Kelvin Banks Jr. is a guy that could definitely play inside at guard at his first year or two, or he could go outside to tackle right away. That's a good thing about some of these offensive tackles this year. Very versatile. They could play inside or outside. And Seattle needs some versatility and some strength on the offensive line. At number 19 to Tampa Bay, I'm going to go with Alabama's linebacker Campbell, one of only 2 linebackers I have with a first-round grade this year. And guess what? He's basically a younger version of Levante David. Levante David is now 36 years old, though, and has 1, maybe 2 years left. But outside of David, Tampa Bay has had issues staying healthy at the linebacker position. So for this year, put Campbell right next to Levante David. Let him learn from him and grow. And then next year, he takes over David's spot, and you end up fulfilling that same type of legacy that David has left over the course of his career. At number 20 to Denver, I'm going to go with Omarion Hampton. And if you're a Denver fan, you may look at this and say, do we really need a running back? I think you do. And I know tight end is also going to potentially be in play here, but you signed Evan Ingram, so you may not need to go with like Colston Loveland now. So why don't you get yourself a locked-in-stone workhorse running back that is the type of game-changing guy that Sean Payton used to have with Alvin Kamara in New Orleans. When we take a look at Omarion Hampton, his vision, his balance, his footwork, he is one of those extremely impressive running backs that just can make guys miss, can make moves that you just didn't see coming, but he's also a violent runner. He is not scared to run away from contact. Now, his biggest weakness that I see is sometimes he hits that top gear a little bit too quickly. So instead of getting through the line and then hitting that top gear, sometimes as he's going through the line, he's already at top speed, and that's because the offensive line would open up some big holes against lesser opponents. At the NFL level, you are not going to be able to do that. But Hampton's not scared of contact. He's going to run right through you if he needs to. He's going to make you miss, and he's going to make it very difficult to tackle him and even get hands on him. But guess what? He's fast, and based on his testing at the combine, he absolutely is a first-round prospect now. And if you've been listening to me over the last month or so since I started talking about prospects, I brought up Omarion Hampton as being way closer to Ashton Jeanty than what a lot of people recognize. And I went back to what I said a couple of years ago about Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, is Omarion Hampton going to be as good as Jahmyr Gibbs? I wouldn't go that far. But Jahmyr Gibbs was way closer to Bijan Robinson than people would give him credit for. And everybody was talking about Bijan. But guess what? Jahmyr Gibbs has been an absolute force in Detroit over the course of his first 2 years in the NFL. And Omarion Hampton in the right position, which could end up being Denver, would be exactly the same thing. He would be really, really close to production if Ashton Jeanty were to be in Las Vegas and Hampton in Denver. This is going to be my surprise pick of the first round. And that's going to be quarterback Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss, going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the reason I'm going to go with Jackson Dart here is because I feel like Pittsburgh misses out on the quarterback market. They're going to end up needing to draft a guy to finally come in and help stabilize that position. Kenny Pickett should never have been drafted as high as he was in the first round a few years ago. They absolutely missed on that. But Jackson Dart is way better than Kenny Pickett ever showed himself being. Jackson Dart just unfortunately hasn't stood out as much. But when you sit down and you watch the film, you see a guy that is absolutely capable of being a first-round quarterback. Right now, Pittsburgh's starting quarterback on the depth chart is Mason Rudolph. I don't see any way, shape, or form that they let Mason Rudolph be the starting quarterback come week 1. And if they end up missing out on Aaron Rodgers and probably Russell Wilson's not returning to Pittsburgh, then I definitely would expect them to potentially make a move here in the first round for a quarterback. And Jackson Dart could fit perfectly with this offense. Unfortunately, Arthur Smith could also ruin him, though. At 22, Colston Loveland reuniting with his college coach, Jim Harbaugh, and giving Justin Herbert a huge weapon on the field and another blocker to help protect him and open up this run game. We know what Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh love to do. They love their tight ends. They love to block and be nasty up front, and they love to run the football. Guess what? Colston Loveland does all of that. At 23, I'm going to go with the big man out of Michigan, Kenneth Grant, up front for the Green Bay Packers. Now, if Jair Alexander ends up being traded by Green Bay, this ends up becoming a cornerback pick for me. So we'll definitely update this at some point in time, depending on what happens with Green Bay over the course of the next few weeks leading up to the draft. But Kenneth Grant in the middle of that defensive line, I'll tell you what, as a Lions fan, I don't love it, but as a Michigan fan, I know the damage that this guy can do, and he's exactly what Green Bay needs in the trenches. But another key factor that could lead us to more information about what Green Bay does here is the fifth-year option of Devontae Wyatt. If Green Bay picks it up prior to the draft, then maybe they don't go interior here. But you also lost TJ Slayton as well on the interior of the defensive line. And if you don't pick up that fifth year on Wyatt, you're going to have to replace him next year as well. And number 24, the Minnesota Vikings, who have set themselves up to have a really good draft because they killed it in free agency. They are solid all the way around. They can now go best player available, and they don't really have a specific need that needs filled right away. So why don't we go ahead and go with Harrison Smith's replacement, the safety out of Carolina that absolutely blew everybody out of the water at the combine, Nick Emmanwori. Now, the safety out of South Carolina did some awesome things at the combine. He tested spectacular. And a lot of people are comparing him to one of my favorite players in the draft a few years ago, Kyle Hamilton. Kyle Hamilton was my #1 overall player in that draft. And look at what he is doing now for the Baltimore Ravens. Nick Emmanwori could end up doing the same thing for the Minnesota Vikings. He's going to get some work in this year, and he's definitely going to get an opportunity to play. But just think about him in that defense when Harrison Smith calls it quits. At number 25, the Houston Texans, and this is one of those picks in this draft that makes way too much sense. Even if it's not Josh Simmons, they're going to be doing something on the offensive line. But they're going to get a pretty big gift here for Josh Simmons, offensive tackle out of Ohio State. If he had not had that patellar injury at the end of last season, he would be above and beyond the #1 offensive tackle and a top 5 pick this year. So really a lot of it is going to depend on what the medicals look like. But getting Josh Simmons this far down is a huge win for CJ Stroud and the Texans. At number 26 to the LA Rams, I'm going with this year's fastest player from the combine, Maxwell Harrison, cornerback out of Kentucky. Kobe Durant is going to need somebody on the other side of him. The LA Rams, their defense looked really good last season. But out west, you got to stop the pass. And this is something that they're going to need to factor into their decision on whether or not they decide to move forward with somebody maybe on the offensive line or trying to reinforce the back end of their defense. In number 27, the Baltimore Ravens, I'm going to have them go with what a lot of people consider to be a consensus top 10 player, safety Malachi Starks out of Georgia. Now, Nick Emmanwori is getting a little bit more love than him right now because of his testing at the combine. And Starks, unfortunately, saw a little bit of a decline in production this last year at Georgia, so there are some question marks. But pair him next to Kyle Hamilton in the back of your defense, and you're going to stop giving up some of those huge plays that plagued your defense and killed your offensive momentum last season when they couldn't get back on the field. At number 28, Detroit's going to go with an edge rusher. And the way that this mock draft worked out, Mykel Williams out of Georgia ended up falling down to this place. Now, a lot of people feel like Mykel Williams is definitely a top 15 pick. And I do think he is. But I think there's some other things for the other edge rushers that just stand out a little bit more. They pop a little bit more, where Mykel Williams is good. He's going to go out there and be good. And for Detroit, that's all you need on the other side of Aiden Hutchinson. At number 29, the Washington Commanders need to replace their sack leader from last season, Dante Fowler. And they're going to get a guy that is flying up draft boards right now and is locked in as a first-round pick, edge rusher out of Boston College, Donovan Ezuraku. In this mock draft, if it hadn't been for Mykel Williams falling as far as he did, Ezuraku would have been above and beyond my pick for Detroit right before this. But this is a great fit for Washington as well, and he can immediately step in and keep up the pressure on NFC East quarterbacks. At number 30, the Buffalo Bills. They've got some nice depth pieces at the cornerback position, but they need another playmaker, a guy that is definitely at least a cornerback 2 locked-in starter. Trey Amos is not being talked about nearly enough right now. He's a solid cornerback. He's not as flashy as some of the other guys ahead of him, but in Buffalo as the cornerback 2, he could do an excellent job. At number 31 to the Kansas City Chiefs, I really like this fit with Josh Connolly Jr. A lot of people feel like he's one of the best left tackles in this draft class. Me personally, I just like some of the other tackles over him. I feel like he could be a really good right tackle, or he could be a really good offensive guard though, and Kansas City could utilize him in either of those two places. Now, if Kansas City decides they just want a left tackle starter and they don't care about moving somebody inside to guard to replace Joe Thuney, then I could see Ariante Ursary out of Minnesota. That offensive tackle, I've also got a first round grade on him, and he could end up going here as well. And at number 32, Philadelphia continues to build their SEC defense with Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss. This is a guy that just absolutely fits right into where Milton Williams was, who left in free agency, and keeps the interior of that defensive line super solid and can get pressure on the quarterback as well. Headliner Nation, I really hope you enjoyed this mock draft. Mock drafts are not easy to do. And if you watch this and at any point in time disagreed with one of my picks, let me know which one down in the comments below. But that's why mock drafts are fun. It lets us play out different scenarios, different opportunities for these teams to end up getting better through the draft and really move some things around. And this won't be my only mock draft of the season. I'm going to try to do at least 2 more. One to update you in a couple of weeks when some more free agents have come off the board. And then obviously my final mock draft, which will come out right before the NFL draft. But hey, if you like the content, hit the like button. If you didn't like it, hit the dislike button. Doesn't matter to me. Just let me know what you thought of the mock draft. Leave a comment down below on some areas that you agreed or disagreed with. But subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notification so you're getting our content right away all year long. Make sure y'all are staying safe and healthy out there, and I'll see y'all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.